When did your feeling about something is very wrong here turned out to be true? I befriended an elderly man after a middle school project about WWII. He served on the US San Francisco, and I continued to visit with him weekly or so all the way through high school. His house was on the way home from school and I would often call to tell him I was coming, and then dropped by after practice. Being a 92-year-old man, he didn't have a ton going on, but occasionally had appointments and such that took him out of the house. One day I called, and he didn't pick up the phone. Not super strange, given the aforementioned appointments, but I just had this sinking feeling in my chest that no matter how long I waited, he was going to pick up the phone. Got a call the next day from my middle school teacher, who also regularly checked in with him, telling me that he had passed away. I got to speak at his service and I'll always remember our time together. R.I.P. Gene. So sorry for your loss. I'm sure he appreciated your friendship as much as you did. Came home very late one night. My parents and sister were already asleep. House felt funny. Dogs were barking in a strange way. Looked around and noticed that my stepmother's car was not in the driveway, but her purse was in the kitchen. My dad's wallet was not on its usual place. Caught someone creeping around in the backyard. The commotion woke everyone up. Creeper was one of my sister's friends. Turns out, her friends decided to break in due to the fact that my parents never lock the doors and the dogs all knew them. Steal my dad's cash and credit cards, and take my stepmother's car for a joyride. Since she drove a Toyota Corolla, I have no idea why. We found the car in the next subdivision. Why Creeper Boy was not with his buddies. He figured he could double back and spend some quality time with my sister, and my timing was just about perfect. He ended up rolling on his buddies and getting a reduced sentence. His parents were pissed at me more for injuring their little boy than they were at him for breaking into people's houses and stealing cars. Yeah, his parents' attitude is definitely what got him that way. Enabling parents create criminals. I'm not sure if this fits the criteria, but I'll tell my story about a weird vibe I got. At my old job there was a regular that would be there right when we opened the doors, and he would head directly to the music department, where I worked. Now when you're working in the music department, you can't leave it unattended, so I had to stay back there, and then this guy would come back and just chat your ear off for about 1.5-3 hours every day, sometimes more. From day one I got a weird feeling about the guy, but wasn't exactly sure what, since he seemed nice enough, but just very creepy. I told a lot of my coworkers that, if he creeps you out, get management or get security or someone. Just don't be alone with him, especially girls. Fast forward to a couple days later, and I heard from some other coworkers that he had asked for a ride home from a younger looking male coworker of mine. Next time he came in, told him he can't just be asking for rides like that, and I've seen him walking places. He can continue to walk everywhere. He tried to play it off like nothing happened, and he just needed a ride somewhere, but he asked only that male coworker for a ride, no one else. So I knew something was up. So one day, I'm opening up my department and expecting to see him to come in and talk my ear off, but it never comes. The next 5 mornings or so, he never comes in, so I felt relief, but also I was curious why he went from coming in every day for about 2 months to just no more. After I leave work that day and get home, one of my managers texts me saying, I guess now we are all gonna listen to your feelings about people, and link me to an article about the guy. He was a convicted child predator who had moved to my state to get away from his previous convictions, only to do the same thing here. Here's that article if anyone's curious. Link in description. Close bracket. TLDR. One of the regulars at my old job gave me really weird vibes. Come to find out he's a child molester. Holy shit. You don't need a sixth sense to get a creepy vibe from that mugshot. Something about the smile not reaching his eyes is fucking creepy as hell. Very would be an exaggeration, but after my mother went to bed each night my dad would go out to his car beside the driveway and talk on the phone for about 15 minutes. I outed him. He had been having an affair for about 10 years. 10 fucking years. My friend's dad had one for close to 20. For the last few years he didn't even bother hiding it. She was a close family friend and his wife was a doormat. But he was a champion cunt and the only reason he ended the affair was because he didn't like the pets she got to help her deal with her cancer. Woo. I was walking back to my dorm from class and had a gut feeling that I needed to see my friend right away. I walked into his dorm room and found him on the floor seizing. He is fine now, but it was still weird that I just knew something was wrong before I had seen him at all that day. Maybe you're actually a service dog eater. Thanks for all the silver and gold, my friends. My wife and I were renting for a few years when we decided to take the steps to buy our own house. We had enough for a deposit and had a mortgage quote arranged. We went to look at a number of houses and found one that we really liked, so decided to put our offer in. We were told that this was most likely going to be accepted, but they were going to wait a couple of days before deciding. That evening I sat in bed reading when I had a horrible feeling that something wasn't right. The next day I told my wife that I wasn't sure about it and convinced her that we needed to retract our offer. So we did. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare. Within 2 days of pulling out of this offer, my wife was made redundant, totally by surprise, and she hadn't been working at the company long enough to get much of a payout. A week later our car broke down and was beyond repair, barring spending more than the car was worth. We really struggled for the next year or so, and would never have been able to pay off a mortgage. We are in a much better place now, but we know that if I hadn't had that moment we would have been screwed. This one made my heart warm. I'm glad to hear things worked out. I hope you're in a lovely house now. When I was in college I had a really weird class and work schedule that resulted in me usually taking my dog for her nightly walk around 3 or so in the morning. There was a giant parking structure for the college right by its baseball field, and I would usually cut through there and let my dog run around on the field before circling back to my apartment. One night on the way over, I heard a faint humming in the parking garage, followed by some sort of weird, almost alarm sounding noise. Being the horror movie victim that I am, I started walking towards the sound, which meant walking down to the lowest level, which was one below street level. When I got down to the ramp my dog started to get visibly stressed, whining and sort of bouncing around, looking at me repeatedly. I started to really get stressed out at this point, but pressed on. When I got down the ramp, I looked around and saw behind it a small golf cart, which on its own wasn't that weird because the school's maintenance staff use them all the time. This golf cart, however, was on and running, which was producing the humming noise, but with no driver. I walked over to it, and behind it was one of the Home Depot buckets tipped over, with trash scattered around. Before I could really wonder what was going on, I heard the alarm sort of sound again, only this time I recognized it. I went a little further around to the elevators, and found a man unconscious inside one, blocking the door, which was repeatedly tried to close but couldn't. Once I was down there near it, I knew what the sound was, because we used to block it in the dorms all the time waiting for friends. At this point my dog was going nuts. I put her leash over one of those parking poles to stop people from hitting things and approached the man. I didn't know CPR at the time, but I checked if he was breathing. He was, so I quickly called 911. Fortunately I had service, and the campus police station was literally a 2-minute walk from there. A couple police officers arrived quickly and began to administer CPR, and an ambulance arrived shortly after. I had to hang around for a while and explain what happened. The stressful part was not finding out if he was okay until several days later. I called the campus police station, and they said they couldn't share his specific medical situation, but told me he was okay and would likely return to work at some point. I'm guessing he had a heart attack, but I'll never know for sure. I never saw him again. You saved the dude's life. That's awesome. One night while I was home alone I was feeling oddly anxious for a few hours. Like every sound I heard seemed suspicious. Later while I was trying to sleep I look out my window and see someone just standing on the sidewalk in front of our house. It's likely that he was there for a while. Just after I notice him, he comes up to the door and starts knocking, which freaks out my dog and makes him start barking, which he normally doesn't do when people come to the door. So in a panic I start heading out of the back of the house while calling my parents. At first they don't really believe it's an issue, but I insist that it's not normal. They rush home, and my dad confirms my suspicions that it was my sister's abusive ex-husband. So my dad takes care of things and sends him on his way. He has been harassing us for quite some time, but now he's homeless, so trying to get a restraining order has been a struggle. He likely wasn't planning anything violent, but it was definitely the first time I've sensed something being wrong, and it really freaked me out just how much I felt it that night. My neighbor's ex was harassing her for a while, and then he became homeless. He broke in and waited for her to come home. Then he shot her and himself. Sometimes when people feel like they have nothing left to lose they really go off the deep end. So when I was little, my cousin that lived 30 minutes away was my best friend. Our parents used to meet up at my grandmother's house every week, just so that we could play together. Occasionally I would go on sleepovers to her house. One weekend when I was staying over with them, it was coming up to bedtime, and I had a really weird feeling, and just wanted to go home. I was crying hysterically, and my uncle brought me home. Only this year I found out that my dad had planned on leaving my mother that night, and me ringing crying saying that I wanted mommy and daddy made him change his mind. My mother doesn't know this, nor any of my siblings. My dad told me one night while we were out at a bar, and he was drunk. How are your parents doing now? Was it a one-time panic attack style I need to get out thing by your dad that resolved in they're okay, or are they separated? Seriously, please don't leave us hanging. Up. In 2014, when that year's X-Men movie came out, I went to go see it with my best friend. 2/3 RDs of the way through, I felt the most off I've ever felt. Sick, chills, feverish, gut drop, time warped, everything. I peeked at my phone, and I had dozens of texts, missed calls, and voicemails. My dad had passed away. Sorry for your loss. The highway that I take home from work had just been repaved and none of the lines were painted on yet, except for the lines in between each lane. There were no lines painted for the shoulders yet, but plenty of space to pull over to the shoulder part of the highway without impeding traffic. On one particular day, there was a city truck parked in the shoulder. I got over to the left lane to give them plenty of space, but knew that the guy on the driver's side opened his door way too wide for being next to 70+ mph traffic, and was walking way too close to that traffic. I immediately thought that wouldn't end well. I get home, and as I'm watching the news an hour later, there was a crash on that highway, at that spot I passed, involving the driver of the city truck. Someone hit him. He was dead on the scene. They, I'm assuming his coworkers, friends, and family, put up a memorial of him at the exact spot that I passed him. To this day, I still get over to the left lane when I'm passing him. The lines for the shoulders were painted on the next day. I'm always annoyed when people don't move over 4 cars on the side of the road. Sometimes it's just not possible due to traffic, but normally it's such an easy thing to do and can save a life. My mom called me when I was out with a friend. She told me my brother didn't come home last night. She was very worried. Even though this is not the weirdest thing for a 21-year-old, I went straight home. We both felt like something bad had happened at home. His phone was on the couch in the living room, so we couldn't contact him. Called the police etc. A week of investigation later his body was found. He had drowned himself in a nearby lake. Miss him every day for almost 3 years now. That's horrible. I'm sorry you lost your brother. The other 4 starters on my basketball team and our coach died in a car accident 22 years ago this past Saturday, December 8th, 1996. In the week leading up to the trip we all had some sort of Final Destination style premonition that it was going to happen. Whether it be by dreams or just ill feelings towards it. I was ill the morning of, otherwise I was scheduled to also be in that vehicle. But as a result I was late, and they left before the other vehicles. I got to school, and traveled with other friends instead. This was about 25 minutes later. We hit a traffic jam about an hour and a half into the trip. My friend's dad said it looks like someone's had an accident. I hope everyone is okay. It wasn't for what felt like an eternity that we could see what happened. I will never forget the moment of absolute terror where my heart just sunk, and the sight of my coach's 4WD having been obliterated by a big semi head-on, etched in my memory forever. Rest in peace my family. Came home from university. Next day my mother says, "Let's sit down. I have to tell you something." I said, "Do you have cancer?" She did. There were prior warnings. For the last 2 months on Skype, my dad had stopped speaking to me almost entirely. I put it down to him not wanting to speak with me. What a relief. P.S. Thyroid untreatable. Treatment worked, we think. Kind of a dumb one, but we had this regular customer who was very weird. I worked in an auto wrecking yard, and he always came in and bought random, off-the-wall shit. In a hoe, me and a new guy load some stuff into the back of this guy's van. He gets in to leave, and new guy's standing behind the van next to the building. I say, "Hey, I wouldn't stand there." New guy looks at me puzzled and moves. Sure enough, weird customer puts it in reverse and punches it. Backs right through the wall of our office. Cool. A new door. Directly to the office. Free of charge. Edit. This blew up a bit, but to be succinct, I basically didn't overact because my relationship was already on the rocks and it was the basement common area of the triplex. Also was pretty emotionally distracted by my father's recent passing. 2 nights before this, XGF didn't come to bed at a normal time, but knew she was still in the house, just in a different room watching some TV or something similar. This was a somewhat common occurrence and I usually just went straight to sleep, but this time I just couldn't get comfortable sleeping and had a sense of dread. I had about an hour of fitful sleep and woke up to her still not there and the sound of loading screen music coming from the other room. So I got up and sure enough, I heard a very faint sound coming from the basement and long story short, she was banging who I considered a friend in the basement and I sat there for 5 minutes at the top of the stairs listening to them talk about their dirty little secret. IDK how many other times they banged, or how many other guys, but you can imagine things ended shortly after that. Semicolon. Damn, she did that with you in the house. That's just cold. I was letting my dog back inside. She walked right past me with no tail wagging or happy smile, walked right through the kitchen without wanting a treat, and went straight to a doggy bed. I knew something wasn't right, and within 10 minutes we were in the car to the emergency vet. She had a tumor rupture apparently. It was clear what needed to be done. Still breaks my heart. That exact thing happened to my dog earlier this year. Like literally the exact thing. I checked to make sure you weren't one of my siblings. I'm sorry about your dog. October 6th, 2017. Was a little bit after midnight and had just gotten off of FaceTime with my girlfriend. Put my phone on do not disturb, like I do every night. Plugged it and went to sleep. About half an hour later, I popped awake and felt like I needed to look at my phone. Was glad I did. Very good friend of mine had called me. Phone never rang because of do not disturb. Instantly knew something was very wrong. In the few years we've known each other, she had only physically called me once or twice before that. She left me a voicemail saying to call her back as soon as I got her message. Her mom died of a heart attack that night and she wanted to tell me. Was almost a year to the day after her fiancé, now husband, lost his mom. Got to attend their wedding last month. Seeing them have a memorial to their moms in the middle of a ceremony very much made me cry. I still have the voicemail. Can't bring myself to delete it. Just a heads up. Make sure to record it in case your provider ever has any issues. Many things can go wrong that could potentially delete it. I used to work at a university as a departmental administrator. There was one student who came in multiple times to talk to my coworker who had an adjoining office. So he would regularly come in through my office, occasionally try to hit on me, and then sit down and shoot the shit with my 65-year-old coworker. Most days when he came in he was dressed pretty emo. One day he came in dressed like some sort of pager boy complete with that style of hat and suspenders. He hit on me even more aggressively than usual. Talked to my coworker and then literally skipped out of my office. I went home that night and told my husband about the guy and said he just had a horrible cloud of creepy around him. The next day he was arrested for drugging a girl by putting a roofie in a smoothie he made for her and then raping her. The dumbest cops that arrested him left him alone in detainment and he managed to escape, cut off his handcuffs, steal a car, and then flee across state lines. It ended up being a multi-day chase and I don't even remember if they caught him. The campus sent out several update emails, even going to far as to warn people with whom he had had contact to keep watch for him wanting some sort of revenge. I have never had such a strong premonition that someone was deeply evil, and I hope never to again. Creeped me out for a good while. The day he seemed so happy was probably the day he obtained the roofers. Oh no, I hadn't even thought of that. This happened just the other day. Things have been rough lately, but last Wednesday I woke up extremely sick to my stomach and very anxious. I felt like crying the whole day. My best friend's brother called later in the afternoon to tell me that my friend had killed himself the night before. It has been pure hell ever since. PM me if you ever need someone to vent to. Sometimes getting it all out helps. At a family reunion I met my uncle's new wife for the first time. When I first saw her face a very cold feeling ran through me. I don't get to know her, she won't be here long thought ran through my head at the same time. This 12-year-old's reaction must have been weird as she, her husband, and my father looked at me like WTH dude. Guess my poker face was weak. 2 months later she died due to a traveling blood clot from her hip surgery. Was so sad as she was so excited and happy. New love, new lease on life as her hip pain would finally be gone and this happened. Uncle was crushed as you'd imagine. Does anybody notice that you told / know this? I can't imagine they go around telling people that they expected her to die from the first time they saw her. I went to go eat at a restaurant with my toddler, but something said not to eat there. Decided to just go home and make a meal. The restaurant was on the news later because it caught on fire. Do you think they told you not to eat there because it'll catch on fire? Today, I work as a nurse and I took handover on a patient who had a little dizziness, a little nausea and a swollen abdomen. She was fairly bright, able to talk, nothing seemed too horrific, but she was turning a grim grey color and breathing quickly. Our average wait time today was 2 hours. I could have put her back in the queue and moved on, but I had a little dark feeling that there was something sinister happening here. So I called our most senior doctor out of a consultation and asked him to see her right fucking now. Ever heard of your abdominal aorta? Enormous blood vessel that can pouch out, suddenly rupture, and make you bleed internally to death in minutes? It's called a burst AAA, abdominal aortic aneurysm. You've heard of it now. That's what she had. I've never seen one before, but now I have. Within 5 minutes she was barely responding. Within 10 her blood pressure had dropped to a barely sustainable level. Within 20 minutes I was pouring blood into her, and 8 people were around the bed. Within an hour she was on an operating table clinging to life. But because I raised the alarm, and because my team worked our asses off, that woman is still, somehow, alive. Feels good, man. Woke up one morning with a sinking, panicky feeling. I knew my grandmother was going to die. I just couldn't get anyone to believe me. I was young, so I lost it in the school lobby, screaming at my mom that I couldn't go to class because my nana was going to die. Everyone assured me that she was stable, though she was very ill, and that I should go to class anyway. She died that afternoon. Geez, that's rough. Forgive me for asking, but was there any kind of I told you so moment? A little bit. Yeah, my mom got off the phone with my aunt. My dad already knew, because he was there when it happened, and I was sitting there eating a chocolate chip cookie, and thinking shoulder believe me. Over 20 years ago, when I 17Y/0 also, 2 of my buddies came to pick me up, to get the night started. I got into the backseat of a Geostorm. If you remember those, it was a tiny car made of. Link in description. Soon I sat down. I had a feeling of impending doom rushing over me. I had never felt that feeling before, and never felt it since. I immediately was asked to be let out with some excuse, and said we would catch up later. I get out, and feeling quickly fades, so I go on about day. About 2 hours later I catch up with my other friends and am greeted to learn that 2 that came to pick me up earlier were involved in major car accident. Both were seriously hurt, and in the hospital. This accident happened about 10 minutes after they tried to pick me up. They both survived. The car did not survive though, and it was struck in the passenger side rear right where I was sitting. I'm pretty positive by seeing the damage done, that I would not have survived. Glad you're still alive and kicking, Opus. I'm already a nervous flyer. One time I was taking a flight on American Transair from Phoenix to Vegas or vice versa, don't remember. Anyway, the engine started up and all of the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could swear that the engine on my side of the plane sounded funny. Just as we started to taxi, the engine blew up. Flames and thick black smoke started coming out of it. They shut down the engines and had us disembark. They offered us an alternate flight. I walked as fast as I could to the rental car counter. If there was something wrong with the engine causing it to vibrate at a low frequency, you may have sensed it. Low frequency sound below your hearing threshold can cause goosebumps, a feeling of being watched, or other strange sensations. Cool. Didn't know that. I came home to my mom supposedly out for a walk and my little brother seeming worried she hadn't come back yet. I noticed her keys were hanging up. I had a sinking feeling something wasn't right. Why not take your keys? Anyway, long story short, she hasn't gone for a walk. She has locked herself in a back room in our guest house thing that you can only lock/unlock from the inside, and had taken a whole heaps of pills to kill herself. She survived. This was over 15 years ago. Still haunts us. She was dressed in her wedding dress. My parents had just divorced. It wasn't nice. Fuck. Fuck is right. That shit was dark. I hadn't been feeling well for a few weeks. Shortness of breath despite being pretty athletic, and could feel my heart pounding. I saw my doctor who suggested anxiety, prescribed some meds, and sent me on my way. But I just had this feeling. A few days later I woke up and had trouble walking to the bathroom without losing my breath. I don't know why it even came to mind, but all I could think was something is wrong. This isn't anxiety. I need to go to the So I walked myself to the hospital and asked if it was possible I had a blood clot. Was reassured that, if it was a clot in my lung there was no way I could have walked to the hospital. Convinced them to test me anyway, and it was a pulmonary embolism. Listen to your instincts, friends. I'm in the process of getting chest pains checked out, which my GP thinks is anxiety even though I'm not experiencing any anxiety at the moment, and haven't done for years. This story scares me, open bracket. My dad did something like this while driving. Carload of family, zipping along as he was prone to doing. Then, just before a blind corner, slowed right down for no apparent reason. Like, slowed a lot more than necessary. A second or two later another car comes around the corner on our side of the road. Would have been a head-on had dad not felt the uncanny urge to ease up. I tend to slow down at harrowing looking blind corners. For this reason. Weird answer, I know. But one day many years ago I was boiling the kettle to make tea and suddenly thought, what would I do if my kettle broke? I don't have a spare. Thing is, I was instantly freaked out because it felt like it wasn't my thought. That's all I know how to describe it. Such an anodyne thing to think, but it was like an external thought had been placed in my head from somewhere else. It made me really uncomfortable. Such a strange sensation. Several hours later, when I was making tea again, as the kettle was boiling, a blue spark suddenly flew out the base and it died. I had to buy a new one the next day. This is a refreshing change honestly to all the death in this thread. But, the kettle died.